Hi everybody, TJ Mack Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here, and in today's video I want to talk about how collecting vintage magazines has really enhanced my vintage card collection. And one of the biggest reasons why is that, like cards, magazines tell the stories of their times, but they do so in a way that's much deeper than a sports card would do it. You can read the articles and get some contemporary views of players that you may not know about. And one of the things that's really neat about magazines is there's a lot of players that never became legends of their game, but may have been important players during their time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today in a couple of the articles that I'm going to share. And I'm going to show some cards with it, and I just want to kind of give you an idea of how I look at magazine collecting and marry it up with my card collecting. And some of that's from the visual standpoint, the beauty of the covers, but more importantly, I want to do it from the standpoint of the articles in today's video. Now, just to give a quick background on magazines, I've mentioned many times that my family did a large collection of magazines from my father-in-law, and many of them are newsstand editions where they don't have a subscription label like you see here on this George Brett. Now, if this George Brett magazine didn't have a subscription label, it would be far more valuable. This is his first Sports Illustrated cover, and the reason why that is, aside from the beauty of the magazine, I know some will say in the comments they like the subscription magazines, and they're not bad. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's just there's more collectability in the newsstand issues because they're far rarer, for one thing, and some people don't like to have a subscription label on the front of their magazine. So in the case of this one here, you can see on the Sport magazine, there are no subscription labels. There's no residue where a subscription label is removed. And you got to be very careful about that because some folks are very good about removing the labels and making it look like it's a newsstand issue. But these are originals. This one's from my father-in-law's collection. This one was given to him. It's not his name on the subscription label, so I don't know how he acquired that one. But anyway, another way that you can tell a newsstand is not foolproof versus a subscription is if you look at like this example here of this magazine, you can see the subscription card on the inside. Now, sometimes subscription issues will have the card on the inside, but the newsstands, unless somebody pulled it out, should have it in there as well. And it's nice when you can actually have the cards inside the magazine. Just enhances the collectability of them. And this is a 1972 Bobby Orr. This would be a newsstand issue. You don't see any subscription label or the residue there. And some of these magazines, if they're newsstand issues, can be quite valuable because of the rarity, especially the Sports Illustrateds. The sport magazines are not quite as valuable. Some of the Sports Illustrateds can be worth thousands of dollars if they're first covers of high-profile players. So there's a Bobby Hull from 1972 as well. Here's a very early Mickey Mantle Dell Baseball Annual. This probably wasn't something you would subscribe to. I don't know that for sure, but there's no label on that one. And then one that's really a nice one to have in the collection is this one right here. Boxing was a big deal, especially in the 1970s, and you can see on this cover it's a newsstand issue of the Rumble in the Jungle that took place on October 30th, 1974. So this was the preview issue from Sports Illustrated. It's just in wonderful condition, and this was before the fight. And of course, Muhammad Ali won that fight against the previously undefeated George Foreman to take back the heavyweight championship. So a very historic event that's depicted on this magazine here, and one that I love having in my collection. I do have some boxing magazines, probably a dozen or so from the 70s, from the 50s into the 70s, that I don't know how collectible they are, but having this one with Muhammad Ali on it with George Foreman is quite a nice one to have in your collection. One of the magazines we're going to dig a little bit into is this 1972 Sport magazine with the great Bobby Orr on the cover. And I'm going to share an article with you just really depicting how great he was even viewed only 6 years into his career. And I think you're going to find this very interesting. So in this article, Bobby Orr is already being recognized by many in hockey as the greatest player ever. They interviewed several players around the league, and pretty much the consensus was that they were in awe of his talents, with many of them calling him the greatest ever. Now, as I said, this was only his sixth season in the league, and at that time, the young goalie, he went on to be a Hall of Famer and one of the greatest goalies ever, Ken Dryden, had this to say about Bobby Orr. You'd always get a real strong argument about who is the best in basketball or baseball, but Orr is so clearly the best in hockey. I don't know if there has ever been anybody that has so dominated a team sport. And again, this is coming from one of his opponents, Ken Dryden. And then another comment was made by the great Sabres center, Gilbert Perreault, who also went on to become a Hall of Famer. He said, "I use the same shifts on every defenseman. If the guy moves first, I beat him. If he doesn't move, he beats me. Orr never moves. He just waits for me. I have never cleanly moved around him. All the people know he is the best player in NHL history." And then you have probably the second best defenseman of the era, along with Orr being the best. I'd say at least until Larry Robinson came along in Brad Park. He finished second for the Norris Trophy as the best defenseman many times to Bobby Orr. And here's what he had to say. "Orr will skate circles around me. I have to hip check a guy and bury him in the corner to get the puck. Bobby moves a guy to the outside, takes 3 steps towards him, and takes the puck. His speed gives him that extra split second." I just love hearing these contemporary views from great players about one that's viewed as the greatest of all time. And that's some of the things that magazines can do to really enhance your collecting experience. And what's funny is Alex Delvecchio, who, here's his card here from the 72 top set, he played with Gordie Howe for many years, and he wasn't ready to say that Orr was better than Gordie Howe, but he did acknowledge the talents of Bobby Orr. But he did say, "I'm prejudiced towards Gordie Howe because him and I played on the same line for decades." And just a nice, again, snapshot into the contemporary player views of one of the superstars of the time. Now, the same magazine has an article that talks about the 6 top players that have the best chance in becoming the next superstars of the 1970s. And if you're a baseball fan, I think you're going to love this. They asked a group of 11 major leaguers to include Hank Aaron, Joe Torre, Carl Yastrzemski, Ron Santo, and Mel Stoudemire, who they thought. Now, they had already acknowledged, and I'll just put Johnny Bench here first, that Johnny Bench is already a superstar, and this would be a few years into his career. And they also made the prediction in there that he was going to come up big in 1972. So you got to remember, this magazine came out in the beginning of the 1972 baseball season. And those that were interviewed made the right prediction because Bench went on to win the MVP, which was the second of his career, with 40 home runs and 125 RBIs. So I already knew Bench was a superstar of that time, and that was acknowledged. Now, one of the ones that they thought would be the next in line was Vida Blue. Here he is on his 73 Topps card. Now, Blue was coming off an incredible 71 season when he won 24 games, the MVP, a Cy Young, and he threw a no-hitter. He had a star quality about him, and he was compared to Koufax in some ways because when he pitched, he would add another 10,000 additional fans in the seats. And Al Kaline said he threw as hard as any left-hander he ever faced. He has said that with his fastball and control, he's going to be a consistent winner for many years to come. Now, Blue had an off year in 72, finishing 6-10. He went on to have a very good career, but I think we'd all agree he never lived up to superstar billing. He finished his 17-year career with 210 wins, 3.27 ERA, and he was a 3-time 20-game winner. Now, here's a player that you probably maybe never heard of or know very little about, and that's Earl Williams. Here he is on his 76 Topps card. I'm going to put him next to Johnny Bench because he was another catcher in the National League at that time. He won the Rookie of the Year in 1971 with 33 home runs and 87 RBIs. He's one of the biggest prospects in the minor leagues in the late 60s. And Hank Aaron said if he could pick one player to build his club around, it would be Earl Williams. Aaron said Earl can handle a pitching staff, and he has the potential to be better than Johnny Bench. Lou Brock said he would be in a new category, superstar. And Jim Bunning, though, was not very impressed, saying Earl doesn't have the desire. So Earl had some power. He hit 28 home runs in 1972, 22 home runs in 1973. He wasn't near the level of Bench, though, as a catcher. He bounced around the majors and was out of baseball in 1977 at 28 years old. Again, the magazines can tell us some things. Here's Don Gullett. He was a Cincinnati Reds pitcher. He was 21 years old in 1972, coming off a 16-win season with a 2.65 ERA. Ron Santos said if he stays healthy, there's no doubt in his mind he's going to be a superstar. Al Kaline said he had guts. Kaline was ahead of him 3-0 in a spring training game, and instead of throwing a fastball, Gullett throws a changeup for a strike. Kaline said this kid had something special. Now, Gullett did have some injury issues with his rotator cuff and shoulder. He retired from baseball in 1978 at the age of 27 and really didn't ever live up to that superstar billing or even came close to it. So the next one I want to show is Reggie Smith. This is 1968 Topps card. Now, Smith's teammate, Carl Yastrzemski, said he would take Reggie Smith over Reggie Jackson. He said he has everything Jackson has without the morale problem. Stottlemyre said Yaz is a superstar of the Red Sox. Had Reggie played on most other teams, he would already be a superstar. Now, Reggie played 17 years, finished with 314 home runs, 2,020 hits, 1,092 RBIs, and 2 top 4 MVP finishes. He struggled with injuries into his 30s, or else he may have been a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. And next on the list, we have Reggie Jackson. Now, we all know how his career ended, but while he was lower than these other 4 on the list, likely had something to do with the maturity and mental attitude. Reggie was 4 years into his career at this time, and Frank Howard, I think, got it right. He said Reggie is the closest to any of these superstars of being the next Mantle or Mays. Now, I don't think he ever was quite Mantle or Mays, but he was closer than any of the other ones here, other than Johnny Bench, of course, who they already agreed was a superstar at that time. Last one on this list is Ralph Garr, and he finished 1971 with a 343 average, second best in the majors. Lou Brock said, in my younger days, you had to be good all-around ball player, but nowadays you can make it with one exceptional skill. Ralph's speed is outstanding, and he will get a lot of mileage out of it. Hank Aaron says Ralph has an outstanding attitude. If he thinks he can learn something from you, he'll sit around and listen and learn and then use it. Now, Garr played 13 years. He was never a superstar, but he was a good player. He had 3 200-hit seasons, won a batting title in 1974 with a 353 average, and had 1 All-Star appearance. His career average was 306. What's cool, though, is at the end of the article, they, again, interviewed 3 or 11 major leaguers, and they looked at their prognostications, and they said Vida Blue and Earl Williams, who along with Johnny Bench, are going to set the style for the 70s. We grew up with Mays and Aaron, and Blue and Williams provide the link between the baseball heroes of our youth and middle age. Guess they didn't get that one right. The last magazine I want to talk about is this 1958 NFL Preview magazine. And I've shown this one before, but I haven't touched on this article before. This is one of my favorite magazines as far as just looking at how contemporary views were back in that day on football. And one of the cool things in this magazine, I'll just open up to some pages in here, is I looked all through it, and there was a player at that time. His name was Jimmy Orr. I'm going to set him right here. And he was the 1958 Rookie of the Year in the NFL. And he was drafted by the Rams in 1957. He did not play that season. He does not show up in this magazine anywhere on the Rams roster for 1958. In the preseason, Orr was traded from the Rams to the Steelers. Doesn't show up anywhere in the magazine as being traded to the Steelers. And I checked under the Steelers roster. Again, not there. Now, could you imagine seeing that in a magazine in today's NFL? A player that goes on to win Rookie of the Year and he's not even referenced anywhere in any rosters or anything like that. And it turned out that the Steelers had a great acquisition in Jimmy Orr. Now, Buddy Parker, who led the Lions to the NFL championship, he had left the team and became coach of the Steelers, who were perennial losers at the time. And he just was not impressed with the quarterbacks that they had on their team. Their starting quarterback was Earl Morrall, who went on to win the MVP in 1968 with the Colts, but he just wasn't very good yet with the Steelers. But also on that roster, they had Hall of Famer Len Dawson and one of the great quarterbacks of the AFL in Jack Kemp. Now, Dawson went on to win 3 championships, both with a Super Bowl and a couple AFL championships. And Jack Kemp won 2 AFL championships with the Bills. So I'd say those are a few good quarterbacks to have on your roster at that time. But he wanted his old quarterback from the Lions, Bobby Lane, who was really falling out of favor in Detroit. The Lions won the championship the year before with Tobin Rote at quarterback after Bobby Lane broke his ankle. Lane was also arrested for drunk driving in 1957. He was later acquitted, so the Steelers wanted to acquire him. So they put Bobby Lane on that team, and it really helped Jimmy Orr blossom into a great receiver. Now, Orr wasn't the fastest guy, but what's amazing is he averaged 27.1 yards a catch that season. He had 33 catches for 910 yards and 7 touchdowns. And the Steelers under Bobby Lane went 7-2-1. And they just weren't a very good team overall at that time, so that's pretty impressive. Now, the funny thing is, this is Jimmy Orr's rookie card. It did not come out until 1961, and like I said, he was drafted in 1957, and that's just how football cards work. This guy wins the Rookie of the Year in 1958. You don't see his card until 1961. Now, he played with the Colts, where he finished his career catching passes from Johnny Unitas. Orr had an excellent career, retiring in 1970 with 400 receptions, tied for 16th all-time, 9th in receiving yards with 7,914. He was 4th all-time with 19.8 yards per reception, and he's a fun player to collect. You can acquire a nice example of his rookie for about $10, or a nice graded example like this for about $20. Nice little card to have in your collection. So I just wanted to give you some insights on why magazines are just an important part of my collecting, and you can just find some really interesting things in them, or not find some interesting things in the case of Jimmy Orr, for example, that just really enhances your collecting experience. Everybody have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.